here for a second?
Oh, sure. Give me a second. Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. The first chapter of the book of Numbers is about census data. But before we talk more about that census data, I just kind of want to ask you a question. Have you ever looked back on your life and seen God keep his promises to you? I mean, if you're a little bit older, a little more experience under your feet, that might be something that you are more readily able to do as you look back on the hardships and difficulties and blessings that God has given. And you could see very clearly that God has been with you your whole life. If you're a little younger, you might be in the middle of a difficult time and a struggle that doesn't seem to have an end at this point. But ultimately, God's going to keep those promises. And the older we get, and the closer to that promised land that he has waiting for us, the easier it is to see that he does keep his promises to us, that he continues to be with us, that he uses the difficulties in our life for good. The first chapter of the book of Numbers is possibly one that is easily skimmed over by many of us because, I mean, it's kind of the same phrase over and over again. God tells Moses and Aaron to take a census of the whole community, of all the fighting men of the people of Israel, and then it says, all the men 20 years old or more were able to serve in the army, were listed by name, one by one, according to the records of their clans and families. The number from the tribe of da-da-da-da was blah, blah, blah. And it's just that over and over and over and over again. So it's easy for us to kind of just like skim through and skip through and be like, you know what, I'm just going to kind of skim through all this. But if we remember that God inspires and gives these words with the purpose of teaching, then we have to remember that there's a purpose for God using these words. Because he could have easily said that, kind of just jumped ahead and said, all the descendants of the people of Israel who are able to fight are 603,550. But he doesn't. He does it tribe by tribe, using the same language over and over and over again, because he's trying to emphasize a point. The point God is emphasizing is that he keeps his promises to his people. The people of Israel, they just came out of Egypt. They were suffering and enslaved and having hard times pressed upon them. And you know what God did that entire time? He actually used that time and blessed them so that they went from a group of 70 people 400 years before and exploded to a fighting army of 603,000 people. God kept his promises to them, even in that hardship. I mean, if you think about like Genesis 12:2, God calls Abraham, and he's just childless, him and his wife, and God calls him and says, I'm going to make you a great nation. Later he says that he's going to make his children as many as like the stars in the sky. And then later, a couple of generations later, because Abraham has Isaac, and then Isaac has Esau and Jacob, and what does God promise Jacob? That you're going to go to, don't worry about going into Egypt, but when you go there, I'm going to make you I'm going to increase your descendants, I'm going to make them into a great nation. And we see that fulfillment very clearly here in Numbers 1. As God walks through the census data with us, he shows us how large this people got. That they were 603,000 people that were able to fight between 20 years old and as old as they got, but older than 20 years old, there were 603,000 of them. That doesn't include the old people that weren't able to be counted, the kids that weren't able to be counted, the women that weren't able to be counted. So you figure, add all those numbers in, we're talking Israel was like 2 million people. God took and kept his promise to those people who struggled, who went from 70 people to 2 million in 400 years. Because God keeps his promises. And as we look at this chapter, we can remember too that God keeps his promises to us as well. God hasn't made the promise that we're going to be, increased into a great nation like this, like he did for Abraham. But God has made many promises in our life that he's going to use difficulties for good, that he is always with us, and that ultimately we have that promised land of heaven that we get to look forward to, that the people of Israel looked forward to as well. So as we look at this chapter, we can see God keeps his promises. He did it for me, he did it for them, he's going to do it for you. So this census data, even though it seems boring, actually has a lot of life and a lot of application to your life. Till next time, have a great week.